The city was alive with the sound of traffic, neon lights burning through the fog, and footsteps that hurried past without ever stopping. At the corner of a grand marble tower, a man sat on the cold pavement, his coat frayed, his shoes almost bare. He was known to most as just another beggar, a forgotten shadow in a city that worshipped power and gold. His name, though no one bothered to ask, was Elias. On this night, however, fate carved a different script. From the glossy glass doors of that very tower emerged a figure the world adored and envied. Victor Hale, the billionaire tech magnate, the man whose name sat on every magazine cover. His empire reached across continents, his wealth so immense it made nations bow. Yet as Victor staggered into the night air, his chest heaved with a cry he had never let escape in public. It wasn't anger nor arrogance, it was despair. His company was collapsing under unseen cracks. His family had turned distant, and for the first time he felt powerless. The sound of his sob tore through the night like broken glass. Most people would have kept walking. Elias, however, raised his weary eyes, catching sight of the man whose face glowed across billboards. He didn't see a billionaire then. He saw a human unraveling. "You're leaking from the soul," Elias murmured, his voice rough but steady. Victor turned, startled, embarrassed. "What? Who are you to speak to me like that?" His tone carried both defensiveness and exhaustion. "I'm no one," Elias said, his eyes unblinking. "But broken things know the sound of breaking, and I can correct it." Victor's brows knit together. The words, strange yet magnetic, held him still. He should have walked away, climbed into his waiting limousine, drowned his sorrow in luxury. But something in Elias's tone, firm, ancient, unyielding, pulled him down onto the curb beside the beggar. For a long moment, billionaire and beggar sat in silence, the city rushing past them as though they were invisible. "You think you can fix this?" Victor finally asked, his voice trembling. "My empire is crumbling. The people I love have left me, and the one thing I was always certain of, my genius, is failing me." Elias tilted his head, studying him. "Your genius built towers, but towers fall. What you lack is not brilliance. It is balance." He lifted his hand, shaking yet purposeful, and pointed at Victor's chest. "You built outward, never inward. You chased the world, but never asked if you could hold it when it came." Victor stared at him, his eyes wide. "And what would you know about balance? You're sitting on the street with nothing." Elias let out a soft laugh, not offended. "Nothing is heavy when you learn to carry it. I lost everything once too. Money, family, status. I chased and I fell. But here, in this nothing, I learned the one trade you forgot. Correction. Not of systems, not of machines, but of self." Victor felt a strange chill crawl up his spine. This man, stripped of wealth and recognition, spoke with a weight that boardrooms and shareholders never carried. For the first time in years, Victor didn't feel like a billionaire or a failure. He felt like a student. "Teach me," he whispered. Elias closed his eyes, as if listening to something distant. "Correction begins where pride ends. Tomorrow I'll show you, but not in your tower glass. Meet me here in the morning. Come without your entourage, without your mask. If you want what you've lost, you must first learn to live without it." Victor nodded, though doubt still swirled within him. The thought of a billionaire obeying the words of a beggar seemed absurd, almost laughable. And yet, he knew he would return. That night, as Victor rode back in silence, his limousine gliding past the very man who had unsettled him, he felt a seed of curiosity planted deep in his chest. For years, his empire had been built on data, strategies, and numbers. But perhaps there was a truth hidden in the fragments of a man the world had discarded. And as the city clock struck midnight, Elias leaned back against the wall, whispering to the cold night air, "Tomorrow begins a correction." The morning light spilled across the city like a reluctant promise, golden rays slipping through glass windows and steel beams. Victor Hale had not slept. The billionaire who had commanded markets and bent industries to his will now sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the polished floor beneath his feet, as if it might hold the answers. His assistant had called him 3 times, reminding him of urgent meetings, of legal documents awaiting his signature, of investors demanding assurance. Yet, for reasons he could not fully explain to himself, he ignored every call. When the clock struck 8, Victor dismissed his driver and walked the streets alone, his tailored suit traded for a plain black sweater and jeans. It was the first time in years he had moved through the city without tinted glass shielding him, and though he drew curious glances, he walked with a purpose no one could decipher. He found Elias exactly where he had been the night before, cross-legged on the pavement, a chipped tin cup by his side, his eyes half closed as though in meditation. "You came?" Elias said without opening his eyes. Victor sat down beside him, the concrete biting cold against his body. "I said I would." Elias finally looked at him, studying the man as though peeling back layers no one else could see. "Good. Then today we begin." Victor frowned, expecting instructions, strategies, something structured. Instead, Elias fell silent again, simply watching the stream of people passing by. The pause stretched uncomfortably long, until Victor muttered, "So, what do we do?" "Watch," Elias replied simply. Victor shifted. "Watch what?" "Everything. The people, the air, the silence between footsteps. You spend your life commanding, predicting, building. But when was the last time you noticed without trying to control?" Victor exhaled sharply. "I don't have time for—" "That's your first correction," Elias interrupted, his voice sharp but calm. "You think time belongs to you. It doesn't. You belong to it. Learn to see before you speak of urgency." Victor clenched his jaw, but forced himself to stay quiet. The world moved around them. A mother tugging her child by the hand, a cyclist weaving dangerously close to the curb, a man in a suit muttering into his phone, a woman carrying groceries with one bag tearing slowly at the bottom. These were things Victor's eyes usually passed over, unregistered, irrelevant. But sitting there, unarmored by status, he began to see details. The tension in the mother's grip, the strain in the cyclist's shoulders, the exhaustion in the suited man's voice, the quiet determination in the woman with the tearing bag. "They're all fighting something," Victor murmured, almost to himself. Elias nodded. "And you believed you were alone in your fight." The words cut sharper than Victor expected. He fell silent, his mind tugging at memories of boardrooms where he sat like a general at war, of penthouse nights where loneliness echoed louder than the city itself. He looked at Elias and asked, "Is this what you meant by correction?" "Sitting here, watching strangers." "This is only the doorway," Elias replied. "Correction is not about fixing what is broken outside. It is about repairing the lens you use to see the world. And yours is clouded by conquest." Victor tilted his head, a small, sardonic smile tugging at his lips. "Easy for you to say. You've lost everything. There's nothing left for you to conquer." Elias's gaze hardened, yet his voice remained steady. "And in losing, I found what you never had, the ground beneath ambition. You built towers, Victor. But tell me, what do you stand on when they fall?" Victor wanted to argue, to defend himself, to insist that his empire was more than fragile glass. But deep inside, a voice he had long suppressed whispered the truth. He had nothing beneath the towers. If they crumbled, so would he. As the morning stretched into noon, Elias guided Victor in small, strange tasks. He asked him to walk without purpose, to greet strangers without announcing his name, to share the sandwich he had purchased with a man who looked hungrier than him. Each task felt trivial, almost absurd, yet each carried a weight Victor couldn't explain. For the first time, he was not strategizing outcomes, not measuring value. He was simply doing. By the time the sun dipped lower, casting orange fire across the skyline, Victor felt both unsettled and oddly lighter. "What's the point of all this?" he finally asked. "The point is that you've forgotten how to be human without being a billionaire," Elias replied. "And if you can't be human, you will never hold on to anything that matters." Victor's chest tightened. The words scraped against his pride, but also touched the truth he had buried. He stared at Elias, whose wrinkled face bore a map of a life weathered by storms, and asked quietly, "How do I learn?" Elias leaned back, his eyes softening. "By failing without fear, by losing without bitterness, and by giving without asking what returns. You want your empire back? Then you must learn how to stand even if it never comes back. Victor fell silent again, the weight of the lesson pressing down on him. Around them, the city roared with its endless rush. Horns blaring, vendors shouting, laughter spilling from cafes. Yet for Victor, the noise had dulled. He felt as though he stood at the edge of something vast and unknown, a space he had always avoided by filling it with work, success, and wealth. Now, Elias was dragging him toward it. The night grew colder, but Victor didn't leave. He stayed with Elias until the stars emerged above the skyscrapers, until the city lights seemed to mimic constellations. And in that silence, he asked a question that surprised even him. "Elias, what did you lose?" The beggar's eyes darkened, shadows of memory flickering across them. "Once, I was where you are. I had wealth, power, influence. I thought I was untouchable. But I built everything outward, never inward. My empire collapsed, my family drifted, and in my pride, I blamed the world. By the time I realized the fault was mine, I had nothing left. That is how I came here. Not as punishment, but as lesson." Victor's breath caught. For the first time, he saw not a beggar before him, but a mirror, a warning carved into flesh and bone. And in that moment, Victor understood Elias was not teaching him to survive poverty. He was teaching him how to survive himself. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of street food and the hum of late-night traffic. Victor felt the weight of his past pressing against the fragile seed of change Elias had planted in him. He knew tomorrow would bring meetings, lawsuits, demands that clawed at his empire. But tonight, he also knew he would return to this curb, to this unlikely teacher, to continue the correction. And as the clock ticked toward midnight once again, Victor Hale, the man who had everything yet felt nothing, closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm ready." Elias only smiled faintly, as if he had been waiting years to hear those words, and said, "Then the real work begins." The days that followed unfolded like pages from a book Victor had never thought to open. Each morning he returned to Elias, not in the back seat of a limousine, not in the shield of tailored suits, but in plain clothes, walking the cracked sidewalks like any ordinary man. His assistants panicked. His board of directors grew furious. His rivals sneered. "Hale has lost his mind," the papers whispered, but Victor ignored them. For the first time in his life, the noise of the world mattered less than the silence he was learning to hear. Elias never once lectured with pomp or grandeur. Instead, his lessons came in fragments, in small, sharp moments that cut deeper than entire libraries of philosophy. One morning, Elias sent Victor to a crowded diner and told him to leave his wallet behind. "Order a coffee and tell them you cannot pay," he instructed. Victor had bristled. The idea was humiliating, absurd even. But he obeyed. The waitress frowned. But before she could speak, another patron at the counter offered to cover the bill. Victor sat frozen, staring at the man who had no reason to show him kindness. "Why?" Victor asked afterward. "Because I could," the man shrugged. That answer haunted Victor for days. He had built a life where every gesture was transactional, every smile a negotiation, every hand extended with expectation of return. And yet here, a stranger acted with simple humanity. It burned inside him, forcing him to confront how far he had drifted from the essence of people. Another day, Elias told Victor to walk into the busiest part of the city square and simply stand still. No phone, no conversation, no distractions. Just stand. At first, Victor's chest tightened with shame. People stared, some whispered, others laughed. He felt the heat of judgment pressing against his skin. But after long, grueling minutes, he noticed something shift. The laughter no longer pierced him. The stares no longer burned. He realized how much of his life had been driven by the need to be seen as powerful, successful, invincible. And in the act of being still, he discovered the quiet freedom of not needing to be anything at all. Piece by piece, the armor Victor had carried for decades fell away. His pride cracked, his fear loosened, and for the first time he began to see himself not as a titan of industry, but as a man, fragile, flawed, unfinished, yet alive. But while Victor was learning to shed, the world he had built still demanded to be carried. His company was in turmoil. Investors threatened to withdraw. Competitors circled like vultures, waiting for his fall. His advisors urged him to return, to reassert control, to silence doubt with the force's authority. And though the old Victor might have rushed back into the war with teeth bared, the new Victor hesitated. One evening, as he sat beside Elias, the neon lights buzzing above them, he confessed, "If I don't act soon, everything I built will collapse." Elias turned to him with steady eyes. "Then let it." Victor's heart jolted. "Let it? Do you know what you're asking? Thousands of employees, billions in investments, years of work. None of it matters if you cannot carry yourself." Elias interrupted. "What use is an empire if its ruler is enslaved by fear of losing it? You want to correct your world? Then be willing to see it burn and still remain whole." The word shook Victor to his core. Could he truly allow everything to collapse? Could he watch the tower of his life crumble and still stand tall amid the ruins? The thought terrified him. Yet deep within, he knew Elias was right. His empire had never been his strength. It had been his cage. That night, Victor walked through his penthouse like a stranger. The walls gleamed with art worth millions. The floors polished like mirrors, but all fell hollow. He stood by the window, looking out over the city lights, and whispered to himself, "If it all ends tomorrow, will I still be me?" For the first time, he realized he had no answer. The collapse came swiftly. A scandal erupted. Board members resigned. The stock plummeted. Reporters swarmed, declaring the death of Hale Industries. The world that once bowed at Victor's feet now mocked him, painted him as a fallen king, a relic of arrogance. Yet in the eye of the storm, Victor did not panic. He did not rage or plead. Instead, he sat quietly beside Elias, the beggar who had become his compass. "They think I'm finished," Victor said softly. Elias smiled faintly. "Then let them think so. What they cannot see, they cannot destroy. The correction is complete when you no longer depend on their vision of you." Days turned into weeks, and the empire of Hale Industries withered. But something extraordinary began to bloom in its ashes. Victor, now stripped of titles and illusions, returned to the streets, not as a beggar, not as a billionaire, but as a man who had been both. He walked among people without the weight of superiority, without the shield of ego. He listened to stories, shared meals, gave not from wealth but from presence. Slowly, those around him began to change too. A shopkeeper whose rent Victor secretly paid spoke of his kindness. A group of youths he mentored in the park began to dream beyond their circumstances. Even those who once mocked him started to wonder, how could a man who lost everything still walk with such light in his eyes? And then one evening, as Elias and Victor sat together beneath the fading glow of the city, Elias spoke words Victor would never forget. "You came to me as a man broken by wealth. You believed correction was about saving what you built. But correction is never about saving. It is about becoming. You have become." Victor turned to him, his chest heavy with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you." Elias shook his head. "You already have. You listened." Silence stretched between them, rich and full. The city moved on, unaware of the transformation that had taken place on its cold sidewalks. But those who had eyes to see noticed something remarkable. The once untouchable billionaire now walked among them, not above them. He was no longer hailed a magnate. He was Victor, the man corrected. And though his company had fallen, something far greater had risen. A legacy not of towers or fortune, but of a story powerful enough to outlast them. A story whispered in alleys and boardrooms alike. The tale of a homeless beggar who taught a billionaire what it failed to learn. That true wealth is not what you hold, but what you become when you have nothing left to lose. Victor's name would never again shine in the stock market tickers the way it once did, but it found a brighter place. In the quiet gratitude of strangers, in the laughter of children he mentored, in the respect of people who saw not his fortune, but his humanity. And on the final night of Elias's life, when the old man lay beneath a tattered blanket, his breath shallow, Victor sat beside him, holding his hand. Elias whispered, "The correction is complete." And with a faint smile, he closed his eyes forever. Victor wept, not with despair, but with a fullness of love, for he knew the beggar had given him something more valuable than empires, freedom. Years later, people would still tell the story in awe. They would point to the billionaire who once lost everything, and yet found the one thing money could never buy. And when asked what he learned from the beggar, Victor would only smile and say, "He taught me how to live corrected."